A billion light-years from the warmth of any sun, a man was about to commit the greatest biological crime in human history. He was about to wake the dead, and the dead had a very specific agenda. Doctor. Elias Thorne adjusted the haptic feedback gloves covering his hands, wincing as the biometric sensors dug into his skin. He stood in the nerve center of Site Acheron, a classified subterranean laboratory buried 3 miles beneath the frozen tectonic crust of a rogue exoplanet. The world outside had no star, no name, and absolutely no light, save for the sterile blue glare of TerraCorp's industrial floodlights. TerraCorp, the ruthless megacorporation that held Earth's orbital colonies in a vice grip of debt and dependency, had black-bagged Elias 6 months ago. They needed the most brilliant xenobiologist alive, and Elias, burdened by a ruined reputation and a cynic's lack of better options, fit the bill perfectly. Through the reinforced plasteel observation window, Elias stared at the prize. Suspended inside a massive, heavily shielded cryochamber floated an alien specimen, perfectly preserved within a matrix of absolute zero glacial ice. She was magnificent. The being was a towering figure of sleek, biometallic obsidian plating, interlaced with intricate, dormant, luminescent veins. Her physiology suggested the apex lethality of a deep space predator combined with the terrifying, regal elegance of royalty. TerraCorp's board of directors wanted her genetic secrets. They intended to synthesize her biology into a line of self-replicating bioweapons to crush the mounting rebellions in the Outer Rim. Elias just wanted to survive his contract and get a ticket back to a world with actual sunlight. "Initiate the Lazarus Protocol," Elias commanded, his voice echoing flatly in the dead silence of the control room. The automated systems hummed into life. Massive thermal injectors drove spikes of hyper-concentrated plasma into the containment block. This was a highly experimental process Elias had designed himself under extreme duress, utilizing quantum state resonance fields to trick necrotic cells into reversing entropy. The ice began to sublimate violently, filling the chamber with a dense, swirling white fog. Elias watched the telemetry displays on his monitors spike. Heart rate, neural activity, cellular regeneration, metrics that had been completely flat for millions of years were suddenly climbing along an exponential curve. Then, he noticed a critical anomaly. The energy grid of the entire subterranean facility began to drain. Power was diverting from life support, from communications, from the automated defense turrets, channeling directly into the specimen's containment pod. She was not just thawing out, she was actively feeding on the raw electrical current of a modern fusion reactor. How an ancient, extinct being understood how to siphon advanced human technology while still technically unconscious was a terrifying question, and one Elias would not have time to answer. The reinforced plasteel cracked. A single spiderweb fracture spread across the viewing window, followed by a sound like tearing metal. Then, the chamber exploded outward. Shards of hyperdense ice and twisted alloy rained across the laboratory. Emergency klaxons blared instantly, bathing the sterile white room in a pulsing, angry red light. The heavy blast doors at the far end of the lab hissed open as a dozen heavily armed TerraCorp corporate guards flooded the space, leveling high-yield plasma rifles at the swirling fog. From the mist stepped the alien monarch. The luminescent veins across her dark, armored skin pulsed with a blinding, royal purple light, illuminating the swirling vapor around her. She stood easily 7 feet tall, yet moved with a weightless, predatory grace. She turned her multifaceted, luminous eyes toward the observation deck and locked gazes with Elias. Space and time seemed to fold inward. A violent, searing pressure crashed into Elias's mind. It was a psychic intrusion of unimaginable power, forcing its way past his natural neural defenses, ripping through his memories, his cynical worldview, and his very biological makeup. He gasped, falling to his knees as he felt a secondary heartbeat forcibly sync with his own rhythm. A cold, commanding presence settled deep within the architecture of his brain, tasting his thoughts. He saw flashing, disjointed visions of vast obsidian towers, a dying purple sky, and a profound, agonizing betrayal. "Mine," a voice whispered, not in his ears, but vibrating in the marrow of his bones. "Fire!" the lead corporate guard shouted. A barrage of superheated plasma bolts illuminated the room, hurtling toward the towering figure. They never reached their target. Zelia moved with a liquid, impossible speed. She raised a single, elegantly clawed hand. The ambient kinetic energy in the room coalesced instantly into a shimmering geometric shield of hard light purple energy. The plasma bolts struck the barrier, dissipating into harmless showers of sparks. Before the guards could recalibrate their weapons, she crossed the distance in a blur of obsidian. She did not strike them with her fists. She was far too refined for common brawling. Instead, she swept her hands through the air with the precision of an orchestra conductor, sending localized waves of raw, telekinetic force crashing into their tactical formations. The corporate soldiers were thrown like ragdolls, their heavy combat armor crumpling against the reinforced steel bulkheads. They slumped to the ground, unconscious and completely outmatched by a sovereign entity that had been dead mere minutes prior. TerraCorp had spent trillions of credits and sacrificed thousands of lives to unearth her. But what were they actually planning to do with a creature that could casually bend physical reality to her will without breaking a sweat? The facility alarms continued to wail, but a sudden, heavy silence fell over the destroyed laboratory. Zelia stood amidst the defeated guards, her biometallic armor gleaming flawlessly in the red emergency light. She turned her gaze back to the observation deck. Elias pulled himself up using the edge of his console, his breath ragged. The psychic pressure in his mind shifted from a violent, tearing intrusion to a strange, overwhelming warmth. The heavy security doors to the observation deck ripped off their hinges and flew into the corridor. She glided into the room, her towering presence commanding absolute submission from the very air around her. She stopped mere inches away from him, her striking, otherworldly eyes studying his face with an intense, possessive curiosity. She reached out, her cool, armored fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to his nervous system. The voice echoed in his mind again, clear, melodic, and undeniably final. "You have broken the eternal frost, human. By the ancient rites of the deep void, your life is now tethered to mine. You are my savior, my conduit, and my eternal mate. Do not fear, for our reign begins anew." The most dangerous entity in the known universe was currently holding Elias Thorne's face, and his primary concern was the mountain of proprietary damage paperwork TerraCorp was going to make him fill out. The blaring red emergency strobes painted the ruined laboratory in chaotic flashes, illuminating the bodies of the corporate strike team scattered across the floor like discarded toys. A secondary pulse of psychic energy rippled through Elias, dropping him to his knees as his brain scrambled to process a bandwidth of information it was never designed to handle. Inside his mind, a vast regal consciousness was stretching its metaphorical limbs. Zelia's thoughts did not arrive as words, but as overwhelming sensations and razor-sharp concepts. He felt her aristocratic disdain for the sterile, utilitarian architecture of Site Acheron. He felt her profound, predatory amusement at the weapons the humans had brought against her, categorizing the high-yield plasma rifles as nothing more than crude fire sticks wielded by unruly peasants. "You are remarkably fragile," the melodic voice vibrated in his skull, carrying a distinct tone of aristocratic pity. "Your internal architecture is entirely reliant on a thin atmosphere and a singular, vulnerable, organ-pumping liquid iron. How your species conquered the stars is a mystery. Elias grabbed the edge of a shattered console. Hauling himself upright, he tried to project a thought backward through the invisible tether connecting them, focusing on the sheer panic rising in his chest. We need to move. TerraCorp is not going to just let us walk out of here. They have an army. Zilia tilted her head, the intricate bioluminescent veins along her neck pulsing with a vibrant violet rhythm. She seemed to find his fear adorable. Let them come. I require exercise. Before Elias could protest, the massive titanium doors at the far end of the corridor locked down with a heavy metallic thud, sealing them inside the sublevel. At the exact same moment, 4 automated defense turrets deployed from the ceiling, tracking them with crimson laser sights. The turrets spun up, preparing to unleash a torrent of depleted uranium rounds. Elias flinched, bracing for the inevitable end, but Zilia simply glided forward. She did not raise a shield this time. Instead, she reached out with her left hand, her biometallic plating shifting and reconfiguring into a complex geometric pattern. She did not deflect the kinetic energy. She seized it. As the turrets opened fire, the deadly hail of bullets froze in midair, suspended within a localized gravity well of her own creation. Zilia closed her fist. The bullets compressed into a dense, superheated sphere of molten metal. With a casual flick of her wrist, she sent the sphere tearing back through the ceiling, instantly obliterating the automated defense grid. Fascinating. Zilia projected into his mind, the psychic link carrying a wave of dark, analytical satisfaction. Your primitive machines operate on basic binary logic gates. They are practically begging to be commanded. She walked gracefully toward the sealed titanium blast doors. These barriers were designed to withstand a direct tactical nuclear strike, requiring triple redundant biometric clearance from the facility's highest-ranking officers. Zilia placed her pale, armored palm flat against the heavily encrypted control panel. Elias watched in stunned disbelief as the violet luminescence from her veins flowed directly into the circuitry of the bulkhead. She was not just destroying the technology, she was biologically interfacing with it. The proprietary TerraCorp operating system, a billion-dollar marvel of corporate software engineering, completely surrendered. The heavy vault doors hissed, unsealed, and slid open in absolute compliance. Remind me never to let you near my personal data pad, Elias muttered, stepping over the threshold into the facility's main transit artery. Their escape through the labyrinthine corridors of Site Acheron became a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. TerraCorp unleashed everything they had. Squads of heavily armored mercenaries flooded the hallways, armed with thermal detonators and sonic pacifiers. Zilia dispatched them with terrifying, effortless grace. She manipulated the ambient energy of the base itself, plunging entire sectors into pitch blackness before moving through the dark like an apex predator. She turned their own gravity plating against them, pinning heavily armed shock troops to the ceiling while she casually escorted Elias through the carnage. Yet, with every massive expenditure of energy, Elias felt a sharp, phantom ache in his own chest. The psychic tether linking them was not just a communication channel, it was a biological power conduit. Zilia was ancient and nearly omnipotent, but her sudden revival had left her physical reserves depleted. She was unconsciously siphoning his metabolic energy to sustain her incredible abilities. If she kept tearing through corporate armies at this rate, Elias realized with a sinking dread, his heart would simply give out from the strain. You must conserve your strength, he projected urgently, stumbling as a wave of dizziness washed over him. We just need to reach the surface hangar bay. We do not need to conquer the entire facility today. Zilia paused, turning to look at him. For a fraction of a second, the cold, regal mask slipped, replaced by a flash of genuine, ancient empathy. She stepped close, wrapping a cool arm around his waist to support his weight. "Apologies, my fragile consort. I have been asleep for an eternity. The thrill of battle is a potent wine." They moved faster now, avoiding the main checkpoints and taking the maintenance shafts that Zelia expertly mapped by scanning the electrical grid with her mind. The air grew colder as they ascended the final transit elevator toward the surface. The crushing pressure of the subterranean miles gave way to the cavernous, echoing expanse of Hangar Bay 7. The hangar doors opened, revealing a sprawling, brightly lit platform housing rows of sleek corporate interceptors and heavy cargo haulers. Beyond the atmospheric force fields, the endless, starless night of the rogue exoplanet offered a bleak promise of freedom. But the path to the ships was not clear. Standing perfectly still in the center of the staging area was Director Vance. The regional manager of TerraCorp's Black Site division was a man who possessed the empathy of a glacier and the tactical cunning of a starved wolf. He did not look panicked. He looked like a man who was about to close a very lucrative deal. Flanking Vance were 6 heavily modified bipedal combat mechs. These were not standard security models. These were siege engines, standing 20 feet tall, armed with dual rotary plasma cannons and shoulder-mounted missile pods. The mechs locked their targeting lasers squarely on Zelia's chest. "Dr. Thorne," Vance called out, his voice amplified by the hangar's public address system. The tone was sickeningly reasonable. "You have exceeded your mandate. I authorized you to wake the asset, not to take it on a romantic stroll through my multi-billion credit facility." Elias stepped forward, trying to ignore the exhaustion burning in his muscles and the towering alien monarch radiating lethal intent beside him. "The contract is void. Vance, she is not an asset. She is a sovereign entity, and you are entirely out of your depth." Vance offered a thin, utterly humorless smile. He tapped a command sequence into a datapad strapped to his wrist. A low, rhythmic humming sound began to emanate from the floor plating beneath their feet. "I assure you, Doctor," Vance replied, his eyes narrowing as the heavy combat mechs powered up their weapons arrays. "TerraCorp is never out of its depth. We just reevaluate our acquisition strategies." The floor of Hangar Bay 7 was vibrating with a harmonic frequency that made Elias Thorne's teeth ache, signaling that TerraCorp was about to redefine the concept of overkill. The 6 bipedal siege mechs cycled their rotary cannons, bathing the sterile deck in the harsh actinic glare of charging plasma. Director Vance adjusted his perfectly tailored cuffs, entirely unbothered by the localized apocalypse spinning up behind him. He looked at Elias with the disappointed gaze of a manager reviewing a poor quarterly report. "You misunderstand our goals, Doctor," Vance said, his voice easily cutting through the rising whine of the weapons. "Bioweapons are crude. A virus mutates. A bred monster turns on its handler. We do not want to mass-produce soldiers. We want to mass-produce obedience." Elias tightened his grip on the stolen datapad in his hand, his mind racing through impossible survival scenarios. Beside him, Zelia radiated a terrifying, frigid stillness. "We sequenced a microscopic fraction of her dormant genetic code before you decided to play knight in shining armor." Vance continued, gesturing casually toward the alien queen. "We discovered a biological networking protocol. A true genetic hive mind override. Imagine a workforce across the outer rim colonies that physically cannot strike, cannot rebel, and cannot even conceptualize the idea of a union because their very biology dictates absolute submission to the board. We just need her active neural tissue to complete the matrix." A wave of profound Arctic disgust washed over Elias through the psychic tether. It was not his own emotion. Zelia was insulted. The audacity of these transient insects. Her voice resonated in his skull, layered with a deadly aristocratic wrath. to attempt to steal the divine right of a sovereign and apply it to their pathetic commerce. I will teach them the true nature of absolute authority. Zelia. Wait. My heart cannot take another massive energy expenditure. Elias projected desperately, feeling his pulse already hammering against his ribs. She turned her luminous, multifaceted eyes toward him, the intricate bioluminescent veins on her face shifting from a vibrant purple to a harsh, predatory crimson. I will not draw from your well, my fragile consort. I will use theirs. Vance raised his hand to order the firing squad to execute, but Zelia did not attack the mechs. She dropped to one knee and slammed both of her armored palms flat against the hangar deck. She did not manipulate gravity or conjure a hard light shield. Instead, she seized control of the localized magnetic containment field that kept the crushing, absolute vacuum of space from instantly venting the hangar bay. With a violent, twisting motion of her mind, she shattered the invisible barrier spanning the massive launch doors. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Hurricane-force winds ripped through Hangar Bay 7 as the entire atmosphere violently decompressed. Crates, diagnostic equipment, and unanchored interceptors were sucked outward into the starless, freezing void. The 20-foot siege mechs, top-heavy and reliant on delicate gyroscopic balance, stumbled backward. Two of them lost their footing entirely, crashing into the deck and sliding toward the open expanse. Vance's smug demeanor vanished as he was lifted off his feet, screaming silently in the roaring wind. He managed to grab a reinforced stanchion, his legs dangling perilously toward the abyss. Zelia stood at the epicenter of the storm, entirely unaffected by the explosive decompression. She wrapped one arm tightly around Elias, acting as an immovable anchor against the tearing gale. With her free hand, she pointed toward a sleek, midnight black vessel resting on a raised diagnostic platform. It was a prototype deep space interceptor, angular and aggressive, designed for corporate espionage and black ops extractions. That chariot is suitable, she declared in his mind. She lunged forward, carrying Elias effortlessly through the chaotic debris field. They reached the hull of the prototype just as the hangar's emergency bulkheads began to slam down, fighting to seal the breach. Zelia did not bother looking for an access panel. She simply pressed her hand against the smooth, radar-absorbent armor. Her crimson bioluminescence bled into the ship's circuitry, instantly rewriting the biometric locks. The access ramp dropped violently. They scrambled into the cramped, high-tech cockpit. Elias threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands flying across the unfamiliar control yoke while his lungs burned for oxygen as the ship's life support kicked in. The interceptor's engines flared to life with a bone-rattling roar. "I need you on the tactical console," Elias yelled over the thrust engines, gesturing to the co-pilot seat beside him. "We have defense drones launching from the secondary bays." Zelia settled into the leather seat with the poise of an empress taking a throne, though she viewed the glowing screens and holographic displays with undisguised contempt. "I am a monarch, not a technician," she replied, her voice manifesting out loud for the first time. It was a rich, melodic contralto that vibrated with a strange acoustic resonance, perfectly translating her thoughts into English through their psychic bond. These flashing squares are entirely devoid of logic. "Just push the glowing blue hexagon on your right to route power to the aft deflectors," Elias shouted, pulling the yoke back hard. The interceptor shot forward, scraping its underbelly against the rising emergency bulkheads and blasting out into the violent, frozen atmosphere of the rogue exoplanet. "E-colors are merely a spectrum of radiation," Zelia countered coolly, observing the console. "Which specific wavelength of blue requires my tactical engagement?" "The one blinking violently next to your thumb," Elias practically begged, throwing the ship into a dizzying barrel roll to avoid a volley of plasma fire from 3 pursuing corporate drones. The ship shuddered violently as a glancing hit scored across their rear shields. Red warning lights illuminated the cockpit. "This interface is archaic," Zelia stated flatly. She bypassed the holographic keyboard entirely. Instead, she plunged both of her hands directly into the smooth, glass-like surface of the tactical console. The material rippled like water under her touch. Instantly, her bioluminescence surged through the ship's fiber-optic network. The prototype interceptor, designed by human engineers, suddenly gained a terrifying, alien sentience. Zelia was no longer pressing buttons. She was feeling the flow of energy through the weapons systems, anticipating the flight paths of the pursuing drones with the predatory arithmetic of her ancient mind. She did not fire a barrage. She fired 3 singular, perfectly calculated pulse lasers. The shots wove through the turbulent atmospheric storms and struck the drones precisely in their power cores. 3 silent explosions blossomed in the dark clouds behind them. "Effective," she noted, pulling her hands free from the console. The glass reformed flawlessly, though your chariot lacks proper offensive capabilities. "We are just trying to survive the next 5 minutes." Elias breathed, his hands shaking on the controls as they broke through the upper atmosphere and entered the silent expanse of open space. His relief was entirely premature. Waiting for them in high orbit was a TerraCorp heavy cruiser, its massive hull bristling with automated defense turrets and fighter bays. They had walked right out of the frying pan and into a synchronized firing squad. Target locks painted the interceptor's hull, triggering a cacophony of incoming missile alarms. "A calculating hyperspace jump," Elias said, his fingers flying across the navigation array, punching in randomized coordinates just to get them out of the sector. A sudden, sharp pain spiked behind his eyes. Zelia reached out, placing 2 cool fingers against his temple. The random numbers on the navigation display dissolved, instantly replaced by a string of complex alien mathematical variables that human science had not yet discovered. She was overriding the nav computer directly through his mind. "Where are you taking us?" Elias demanded, staring at the impossible coordinates. "Home," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the distant cold stars. "Or what remains of it." The stars outside the viewport stretched into infinite lines of blinding white light as the hyperdrive engaged, tearing them away from the TerraCorp cruiser a fraction of a second before the missile barrage detonated. They were hurled into the swirling multi-dimensional tunnel of hyperspace, leaving the black site and Director Vance far behind. Yet, deep within the intricate code of the stolen ship's mainframe, a dormant subroutine quietly activated. It was a low-frequency encrypted distress beacon, perfectly matching the humming rhythm Vance had initiated on his datapad back in the hangar. It began broadcasting their impossible trajectory across the hyperlanes, a silent breadcrumb trail waiting to be followed. The graveyard of an empire is never built of bones, but of colossal monuments to arrogance. When the stolen TerraCorp interceptor tore its way out of the hyperspace corridor, Elias Thorne found himself staring through the viewport at a corpse the size of a planet. They hung in high orbit above a world entirely choked by sprawling, aggressive exotic flora. Through the swirling gaps in the violent, bruised purple atmosphere, Elias could see the skeletal remains of a global megacity. Staggering spires of dark, biometallic alloy pierced the cloud cover, their smooth architectural curves shattered and overgrown with massive airborne epiphytes. These alien plants cascaded down the ruined skyscrapers like green waterfalls, sporting broad, leathery leaves and massive clusters of bioluminescent moth-like flowers that fed directly off the ambient atmospheric radiation. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly devoid of technological life. Zelia stood directly behind the pilot's chair, her hand resting lightly on Elias's shoulder. The psychic tether between them thrummed with a heavy, suffocating wave of ancient sorrow. Take us down to the central meridian, she instructed, her voice soft but echoing with absolute authority in the tight confines of the cockpit. The coordinates are already in your mind. Elias did not check the navigation computer. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the sudden intuitive knowledge of a landing vector bloom in his consciousness. He gripped the yoke and pushed the interceptor into a steep, punishing dive. The ship's atmospheric shielding flared a brilliant orange as they broke through the dense upper clouds, navigating a treacherous descent through the jagged, overgrown ruins of a civilization that made human cities look like mud huts. He flared the thrusters, bringing the sleek black vessel down onto a massive, cracked plaza composed of seamlessly interlocking obsidian tiles. The interceptor's landing gear groaned in protest as it settled onto the uneven surface, kicking up a storm of luminescent pollen. Elias unsealed the boarding ramp. The air that rushed into the cabin was surprisingly breathable, though heavily perfumed with the scent of ozone and crushed petals. He grabbed his diagnostic datapad and an emergency sidearm from the ship's locker, stepping out into the twilight of the alien world. Zelia followed, moving with a solemn, reverent grace. Her own bioluminescent veins pulsed in a synchronized rhythm with the glowing flora around them, a subtle biological resonance recognizing its apex predator. Did TerraCorp do this?" Elias asked, his voice hushed as he scanned the towering, silent ruins stretching into the horizon. "Did they find this place before Site Acheron?" Zelia walked ahead of him, tracing her armored fingers along a fallen statue that depicted a winged, majestic warrior. The humans possess a staggering capacity for destruction. Elias, but they lack the imagination for a cataclysm of this scale. No alien armada burned our sky. No foreign plague ravaged our cities. She turned to face him, the ambient light catching the sharp, regal angles of her face. "We did this to ourselves. This is the ultimate legacy of the Ethel Guard." They ventured deeper into the city, leaving the interceptor behind. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of their boots on crystalline debris. Elias found his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his exhaustion. He recorded everything on his datapad, analyzing the structural integrity of the buildings and the rapid evolutionary adaptations of the flora. Zelia led him to the base of the grandest spire, a structure so massive it seemed to anchor the very tectonic plate beneath it. The entrance was a yawning cavern of polished dark metal. As they stepped inside, Elias activated a shoulder-mounted floodlight. The beam swept across a vast circular amphitheater, its tiered seating meant to accommodate tens of thousands. At the center stood a raised dais, dominated by a shattered holographic projection matrix. "The Apex Senate," Zelia stated, her voice echoing into the dark expanse. "We unlocked the secrets of quantum energy extraction, drawing limitless power directly from the mantle of our world. It ushered in a golden age. We conquered disease, aging, and resource scarcity. But true scarcity is a myth perpetuated by those who desire control." She walked toward the shattered dais. The psychic link flooded Elias's mind with sudden, chaotic visions. He saw the chamber filled with towering figures in resplendent armor, their voices raised in furious debate. He felt the cold, sharp sting of a calculated political betrayal. A faction within our ruling class, the Syndicate of the Eclipse, recognized that limitless energy meant a loss of their absolute authority. Zelia continued, her tone laced with a bitter, simmering rage. They sabotaged the planetary stabilizers to create artificial energy deficits. They triggered localized tectonic collapses, demanding absolute submission from the populace in exchange for safety within the remaining fortified zones. They fractured our society to maintain their wealth. The resulting civil war did not merely destroy our infrastructure, it cracked the planetary core. Elias lowered his datapad, staring at her. The profound moral parallel hit him with the force of a physical blow. TerraCorp operated on the exact same ruthless calculus, crushing the human orbital colonies under artificial debt and manufactured resource shortages. The Ethelgard had not fallen to a monster from the stars. They had fallen to a boardroom of greedy, short-sighted elites. "You went to sleep while your world burned," Elias said softly. Zelia turned, stepping off the dais and closing the distance between them. Her expression softened, the terrifying alien monarch giving way to an exhausted survivor. "I was forced into stasis by my royal guard as the atmosphere ignited. I failed them. Elias, I possessed the power to shatter mountains, but I could not eradicate the rot within our own council." She reached out, gently taking his hand. The touch was cool, but the psychic connection blazed with an unexpected, profound intimacy. Elias felt her absolute isolation, the crushing weight of a crown belonging to a dead world. And in return, she felt his cynicism wash away, replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty he had never experienced before. He was a fragile, fleeting human, yet his pulse grounded her ancient mind. "You are not alone in the dark anymore," Elias said, his voice steady. Zelia's luminescent eyes locked onto his, a promise forming in the depths of her gaze. "And you are no longer a servant to your corporate masters. Our bond is eternal, my consort. Now, I must show you why we came here." She guided him past the Senate chamber and deep into the subterranean levels of the spire. They descended for what felt like miles, guided only by the ambient glow of Zelia's armor. Finally, they reached a pair of colossal vault doors, sealed shut by a complex matrix of hard light locks. Zelia pressed her hand against the center console. She did not hack it, she bled into it. A surge of her royal purple energy flooded the mechanism. The doors hummed, a deep resonant sound that vibrated in Elias's chest, before slowly grinding open. Elias stepped into the sanctuary and stopped dead in his tracks. Stretching out before him in a cavernous, climate-controlled vault were millions of crystalline stasis pods. They were arranged in perfect, symmetrical rows that faded into the distant gloom. Inside each pod rested an Ethelgard warrior, scientist, or civilian, suspended in an embryonic fluid that pulsed with a faint, dormant heartbeat. "The Genesis Vault," Zelia whispered, looking out over her sleeping subjects. "The uncorrupted genetic future of my species. They await the resonance of the Queen to begin the awakening cycle." Elias felt a surge of awe, raising his datapad to scan the incredible biological technology. As the screen illuminated, his breath caught in his throat. A red, pulsing warning icon dominated the display, overriding his local scans. "Zelia," Elias said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The interceptor. I left a background diagnostic running on the nav computer." She turned sharply, sensing his sudden spike of adrenaline through the tether. "Director Vance didn't just let us take that prototype," Elias continued, his fingers frantically tapping the screen as he isolated the anomalous data stream. "There is a quantum-entangled subroutine buried in the engine's core architecture. It bypassed the main communication array entirely. It has been broadcasting our exact coordinates across the hyperlane since the moment we jumped." Zelia's bioluminescence flared into a violent, blinding crimson. She looked toward the ceiling, her gaze seeming to pierce through miles of rock and metal directly into the void of space. "They are already here," she stated, her voice devoid of panic but heavy with a chilling, predatory anticipation. "The sky is bleeding ships, but human technology does not feel like this." Elias looked at her, entirely confused. "What do you mean?" Zelia drew herself up to her full, terrifying height, the energy in the room crackling with static electricity as she summoned her power. TerraCorp did not come alone, she said, her eyes narrowing at a profound, unseen threat. I sense the minds of the Syndicate. The traitors who broke this world are descending upon us. The sky above the dead world did not just burn, it shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces of hostile, descending metal. Treason, it seemed, possessed an incredibly long memory. Elias scrambled up the spiraling ramp of the Apex Senate, pulling up the external optical sensors on his datapad. The feed rendered a terrifying mosaic of invasion. The bruised purple clouds were boiling away, displaced by the sheer mass of a TerraCorp dreadnought breaking through the upper atmosphere, flanking the Brutalist. Gray human warships were a dozen sleek biometallic cruisers that moved with the predatory grace of hunting sharks. They pulsed with a sickening crimson luminescence that perfectly mirrored the aggressive flora clinging to the ruined spires. At the Syndicate of the Eclipse, Zelia hissed, her voice a deadly whisper that vibrated through the marrow of Elias's bones. They did not perish in the cataclysm. They fled into the deep dark, and now they have returned on the leashes of corporate mongrels. The political reality of the situation crystallized in Elias's mind with terrifying clarity. TerraCorp had not randomly stumbled across Site Acheron. The rogue Ethelgard faction had brokered a deal. The Syndicate needed the vast, disposable industrial machine of Earth's orbital colonies to rebuild their shattered empire. And in exchange, they had sold out their slumbering queen. TerraCorp would gain the genetic code for absolute submission, and the Syndicate would ensure no loyalists ever woke from the Genesis Vault to challenge their rule. It was a perfect mutually beneficial merger of two ruthless monopolies. We need a bottleneck, Elias said, his mind shifting from scientific analysis to raw, frantic survival. He holstered his pathetically small emergency sidearm and began rapidly slicing into the local environmental controls via his datapad. If they breach the central plaza, they can just glass the entire spire from orbit. We have to draw them down into the catacombs. Make them fight for every inch of dirt. Zelia turned her luminous gaze upon him, the intricate veins on her face shifting from crimson to a deep, hyper-violent violet. The psychic tether flared with a cocktail of ancient pride and surprising affection. You are remarkably adaptable for a creature with such a brief lifespan, Elias Thorne. Most consorts would be cowering by now. I usually save my cowering for quarterly budget reviews, Elias shot back, rerouting the spire's dormant auxiliary power into the lower levels. Consider this a very aggressive team-building exercise. Can you wake up the city's defenses? Zelia did not answer with words. She closed her eyes and extended both arms outward, her fingers splayed wide. The ruined megacity responded to the biological signature of its sovereign. Deep beneath the obsidian tiles, ancient geometric arrays shuddered and aligned. Dust cascaded from the vaulted ceilings as hard light projectors, dormant for millennia, shrieked into life. The first wave of TerraCorp drop pods slammed into the central plaza with earth-shattering kinetic force. The heavy steel ramps dropped, vomiting heavily armored corporate mercenaries into the glowing, pollen-choked air. But they were not alone. Striding alongside the human soldiers were towering Ethelgard warriors clad in brutal, asymmetrical armor that hummed with a sickly red energy. The Syndicate had arrived to finish the coup they started eons ago. They never made it past the courtyard. Zelia clenched her right fist and the plaza itself weaponized. Massive, razor-sharp pillars of violet hardlight erupted from the ground, impaling TerraCorp transports and instantly reducing a dozen mercenaries to ash. The Ethelgard traitors reacted with terrifying speed, raising kinetic shields and returning fire with weapons that tore localized holes in the fabric of space. The air in the Senate chamber grew thick with ozone and the stench of burning metal as Zelia manipulated gravity itself. creating localized pockets of crushing pressure that folded human mechs like tin cans. Elias operated from the shadows of the Senate dais, feeding her tactical telemetry from his datapad. He watched the enemy formations try to flank their position. "They are splitting up," he shouted over the deafening roar of collapsing architecture. "Squad Delta is moving down the eastern maintenance shaft. They are bypassing the Senate entirely and heading straight for the Genesis vault." "They will find only their doom," Zilia declared. She grabbed Elias by the tactical harness, hauling him effortlessly as she bounded down the spiraling descent toward the vault. They moved like ghosts through the labyrinthine catacombs, Zilia sealing massive titanium bulkheads behind them with a mere thought. But the Syndicate forces were no longer deterred by locked doors. They were using localized singularity charges to simply erase the obstacles in their path. They reached the antechamber of the Genesis vault just as the eastern wall completely vaporized. A heavily armored Syndicate vanguard stepped through the smoking breach, his brutalist red armor shrugging off the falling debris. He wielded a double-ended kinetic lance that hummed with an unstable, terrifying frequency. 3 TerraCorp heavy infantry units followed him, leveling their rotary cannons at the vast sealed doors of the vault. "Kill the human," the vanguard commanded in a guttural, corrupted dialect of the Ethelgard tongue, though the psychic tether translated the order instantly into Elias's mind. "Seal the queen in the vault. We will drop the mountain on top of her." The TerraCorp mercenaries opened fire. Zilia stepped in front of Elias, conjuring a massive domed shield of violet energy. The depleted uranium rounds slammed into the barrier, rippling the energy field but failing to penetrate. She pushed outward with both hands, expanding the shield violently and throwing the human soldiers backward into the jagged remains of the breached wall. But the vanguard was waiting for that exact opening. As Zilia dropped the shield to launch a counter-offensive, the towering traitor lunged forward with impossible speed. He bypassed her entirely, his eyes locked on the glowing central control console of the Genesis vault. If he destroyed the primary biometric reader, the millions of slumbering Ethelgard loyalists would be locked in stasis forever, effectively dead. Elias saw the trajectory. He calculated the distance, the speed, and his own fragile biology in a fraction of a second. There was no time to warn her. There was only time to act. He threw himself across the antechamber, diving directly into the path of the vanguard. Elias did not possess super strength or kinetic shielding. He possessed a scavenged TerraCorp sidearm and a deeply ingrained stubbornness. He leveled the pistol and fired point blank into the unarmored joint of the vanguard's knee. The alien warrior roared in surprise and pain, stumbling mid-lunge. The momentum of the strike, however, carried the kinetic lance forward. The glowing superheated blade of the weapon sheared through Elias's side, tearing through his tactical vest and biting dangerously deep into his ribs. The world instantly dissolved into a blinding white flash of absolute agony. Elias hit the obsidian floor hard, his datapad shattering upon impact. He gasped for air, but his lungs refused to expand. The ambient sounds of the battle faded into a dull, rushing roar in his ears. Through the fading edges of his consciousness, the psychic tether did not just spike, it exploded. Zilia turned, her regal composure completely shattering as she watched Elias fall in a pooling halo of his own bright red blood. The ancient sorrow and calculated tactics vanished entirely, replaced by a horrifying, raw, apocalyptic fury. The intricate bioluminescent veins covering her body turned blinding white, matching the color of a dying star. The very air around her began to crackle and warp as she drew upon the deepest, most unstable reserves of her power, heedless of the consequences. She was no longer a tactician defending a stronghold. She was an unchained god, and she was about to erase everything in the room from existence. Elias coughed, tasting copper, and wondered if he would live long enough to see the blast radius. Absolute power is a terrifying thing to witness, especially when it is fueled by the agonizing prospect of loss. Zelia did not merely attack the Syndicate vanguard. She unmade him. The air inside the antechamber of the Genesis vault superheated in a microsecond, the atmospheric pressure dropping so violently that the lungs of the TerraCorp mercenaries ruptured before the blinding white energy even touched them. Zelia levitated inches off the obsidian floor, her biometallic armor radiating a light so intense it cast pitch-black shadows against the walls. She raised a single, trembling hand toward the towering alien traitor who had just impaled Elias. There was no elegant manipulation of gravity or hard light shields. There was only raw, localized annihilation. The Vanguard's brutalist red armor flaked into ash, his kinetic lance dissolving into a mist of glowing particles. He did not have time to voice a final command as his entire cellular structure was violently dispersed across the quantum field. The 3 TerraCorp heavy infantry units backing him up suffered a similarly instantaneous fate, their reinforced combat suits crumpling like foil under the crushing weight of her telekinetic wrath. The blast wave leveled the remaining barricades and sent a shockwave echoing up the miles-long shaft of the Apex Senate, temporarily stalling the descent of the invading armada above. But Zelia paid the falling debris no mind. She dropped to her knees beside Elias, the blinding white light of her veins rapidly dimming into a sickly, flickering gray. The psychic tether connecting them was a frantic, chaotic mess of sharp pain and fading consciousness. Elias lay motionless on the cold tiles, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The wound in his side was severe, the flesh cauterized by the superheated blade, but the internal trauma was catastrophic. He looked up at the towering alien monarch, his vision swimming with dark spots. Her usually composed aristocratic face was contorted in raw, unfiltered terror. He could feel her frantically trying to push her own metabolic energy into his failing body through the bond. But it was like trying to fill a shattered glass with a fire hose. His human biology simply could not contain the raw power of the Ethel Guard. Elias forced his head to turn toward the central control console of the Genesis vault, resting mere inches from his bloodied hand. The biometric reader pulsed with a soft, inviting blue light, waiting for the precise genetic signature of the Queen to initiate the awakening cycle. Zelia was far too focused on keeping his heart beating to notice the console, and her own energy was dangerously depleted from the massive kinetic blast. Elias knew human genetics intimately. He had spent his entire career manipulating DNA sequences for TerraCorp's bottom line, treating life as a commodity. He also knew that the moment Zelia had claimed him as her mate inside Acheron, their biologies had irrevocably intertwined on a cellular level. He was carrying her resonance, with a final, agonizing effort that sent pitch blackness creeping into the edges of his vision. Elias dragged his hand across the cold floor and slammed his bloody palm directly onto the biometric scanner. The system chimed, a clean, crystalline note that pierced through the ringing in his ears. The console flashed from blue to a vibrant royal purple. He had not just bypassed the lock, he had hardwired the system with their merged biological signature, overriding the standard, gradual waking protocols and initiating a catastrophic, immediate planetary revival. The vibration began as a low, subsonic frequency that shook the dust from the vaulted ceilings, rapidly escalating into a heavy, harmonic roar. Beyond the massive titanium doors, millions of crystalline stasis pods simultaneously shattered. The embryonic fluid cascaded across the floor of the subterranean sanctuary like a tidal wave. The Genesis vault, silent for eons, erupted with the collective gasp of an entire civilization taking its first breath in 1,000,000 years. Zelia stared at the vault doors, the psychic shockwave of millions of minds suddenly connecting to her own neural network nearly knocking her backward. The loyalist Ethelgard were awake, and they immediately sensed the hostile presence of the Syndicate and the TerraCorp invaders polluting their sacred world. The heavy vault doors were not opened from the outside. They were violently blown off their hinges from within. A flood of towering, heavily armored warriors poured into the antechamber. They did not move with the groggy disorientation of the newly awakened, driven by the furious protective resonance of their queen. They moved with lethal, synchronized precision. They wielded weapons of elegant, terrifying design, igniting blades of compressed starlight and leveling rifles that fired localized gravitational singularities. The tide of the battle inverted instantly. The loyalist forces swarmed up the catacombs and poured into the central plaza. Elias watched the tactical feed on a discarded, cracked mercenary helmet resting near his head. It was an absolute massacre. The heavily armed TerraCorp drop pods were torn apart by bare hands. The bipedal siege mechs that had seemed so intimidating in Hangar Base 7 were effortlessly dismantled by Ethelgard shock troops who treated the human machines like annoying, fragile toys. The Syndicate traitors, realizing their catastrophic miscalculation, attempted to retreat to their sleek cruisers. But the sky above the megacity suddenly filled with swarms of loyalist interceptors launching from hidden subterranean hangars. The TerraCorp dreadnought in high orbit was caught in a brutal crossfire of exotic energy weapons, its thick armor melting like wax before the vessel violently detonated, raining molten slag across the upper atmosphere. The rebellion of the Syndicate was completely crushed within minutes, their remaining forces utterly overwhelmed by the sheer, furious numbers of the awakened hive. But the grand victory meant absolutely nothing to the Queen. The noise of the battle faded into the background as Zelia pulled Elias's fading body into her arms. The coldness of the obsidian floor seeped deep into his bones. He could no longer feel his legs, and his lungs had completely stopped fighting for air. He looked up into her multifaceted eyes, feeling a profound, quiet peace settling over his mind. He had done exactly what he set out to do. He had balanced the ledger, robbing TerraCorp of their prize and restoring a sovereign to her throne. She spoke into his mind, her voice cracking with an emotion that transcended species, language, or logic. "You will not leave me in this dark. Elias Thorne. I strictly forbid it." She did not try to heal him with ambient energy or telekinetic bandages. She leaned down, pressing her forehead firmly against his. Elias felt a searing, unimaginable heat flood his chest. Zelia was deliberately breaking down her own cellular structure, sacrificing a massive portion of her vital life force and feeding it directly into his failing organs. It was a terrifying, violent process of biological rewriting. The intricate, luminescent veins that mapped her skin began to rapidly spread across his own neck and arms, burning into his flesh with a brilliant purple light. His shattered ribs fused together, the cauterized tissue regenerating at an impossible, agonizing speed. His fragile human heart, unable to pump the dense, energy-rich fluid now flowing through his veins, forcibly mutated, developing a secondary chamber to handle the extreme kinetic pressure. His cynic's mind, previously bounded by human limitations, violently expanded, absorbing a sensory bandwidth that allowed him to feel the magnetic pull of the planet and the exact position of every star in the sky above. He was dying, and in the exact same breath, he was being forged into something entirely new, permanently tethered to the sovereign of an ancient world. The transformation was absolute and irreversible, leaving only one question echoing in the vast, newly awakened architecture of his mind. What exactly was a former corporate scientist supposed to do with a kingdom? And how would Earth react when they realized their greatest threat was now being led by one of their own? Earth's orbital defense grid was designed to withstand a coordinated rebellion from the outer colonies, but it was absolutely useless against a sky that suddenly decided to bleed royal purple. Panic is a highly predictable human response, and the governments of Earth perfected it the moment the sun was eclipsed by a fleet of impossible proportions. They did not drop out of hyperspace with a violent rupture of physics. The Ethelgard Armada simply materialized in high Earth orbit. Thousands of colossal biometallic dreadnoughts slipping through the fabric of real space like leviathans breaching the surface of a calm ocean. They dwarfed the terrestrial orbital stations, casting long, terrifying shadows across the continents below. Their hulls were sleek, asymmetrical masterpieces of dark alloy, pulsing with a synchronized, rhythmic crimson light that mirrored a slow, heavy heartbeat. The global communication networks on Earth instantly overloaded. Early warning sirens wailed across every major city, and the United Defense Forces scrambled their entire interceptor squadrons, a gesture as futile as throwing stones at a hurricane. Aboard the flagship, a vessel so massive it generated its own localized gravitational field, Elias Thorne stood on the crystalline observation deck. He was no longer the hunched, cynical scientist who had been black-bagged by corporate thugs. The biological rewrite had been flawless and profound. He stood taller, his posture mirroring the effortless, predatory grace of the alien warriors surrounding him. Faint, intricate geometric veins pulsed with a soft violet luminescence beneath his skin, mapping the pathways of a newly engineered, hyper-efficient cardiovascular system. He wore a dark, adaptive bioarmor that shifted seamlessly with his movements, a mantle of authority that felt surprisingly natural. Zelia stood beside him, her presence radiating a calm, absolute sovereignty. Her hand rested naturally in his, their fingers interlaced. The psychic tether between them was no longer a frantic, painful channel of raw data. It was a smooth, endless river of shared consciousness. He felt her profound power, and she felt his grounded human perspective. They were two halves of a perfectly balanced equation. They are arming their nuclear silos, Zelia noted, her gaze fixed on the blue marble floating in the dark. The observation felt less like a tactical warning and more like a gentle critique of a toddler holding a knife, a crude, self-destructive impulse. Shall I disable their primitive fission cores? Let them hold on to their security blankets for a moment longer, Elias replied, a dry, completely human smirk playing across his transformed features. We are not here to break their toys, and we are here to fire their management, root the broadcast. Zelia gestured subtly to the towering communications officer at the helm. With a single pulse of Ethelgard energy, every firewall, encryption key, and proprietary override on Earth was simultaneously shattered. Every television screen, holographic billboard, personal datapad, and military display on the planet suddenly went black, only to be instantly replaced by the image of Elias Thorne. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the alien queen, the vast expanse of the Ethelgard bridge visible behind them. The visual alone was enough to silence the panicked billions. Here was a human, augmented and regal, standing as an undisputed equal beside the terrifying monarch of a species that could clearly crack their planet in half. Citizens of Earth, orbital colonies, and the United Global Assembly. Elias began, his voice enhanced by the ship's acoustic resonance, carrying a heavy, commanding weight that resonated in the chest of every listener. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne. 6 months ago, I was a senior xenobiologist for TerraCorp. Today, I speak as the bonded consort of Queen Zelia, sovereign of the Ethelgard. He paused, letting the impossible weight of that statement settle over the globe. You are currently terrified, Elias continued, his tone shifting to the sharp, analytical edge of the scientist he used to be. You look at the armada in your sky and you see extinction. But the true threat to human survival is not hovering in your orbit. It is sitting in your boardrooms. With a thought, Elias initiated the data transfer. He dumped the entirety of Site Acheron's classified mainframe directly into the public domain. It was an unfiltered avalanche of corporate atrocities. He broadcasted the undeniable proof of TerraCorp's illegal bioweapons research. He released the financial ledgers detailing the artificial resource scarcity deliberately engineered to keep the Outer Rim colonies starving and compliant. He unveiled the exact genetic matrix Director Vance had attempted to steal from the Queen. A biological mandate for absolute, unquestioning slavery intended for the human working class. Down on Earth, the global stock markets did not just crash, they evaporated. Within seconds, billions of people were reading the internal memos of TerraCorp executives calculating the acceptable mortality rates of their own employees. They dug into the ice of a dead world to steal the power of a god, intending to put a leash on humanity. Elias said, his luminescent veins flaring brightly. In doing so, they woke an empire. Zelia stepped forward. When she spoke, the linguistic translation matrix fed her words directly into the minds of every human listening, bypassing language entirely. Her voice was a terrifyingly beautiful melody of ancient authority. Your leaders expect annihilation. The Queen projected her multifaceted eyes staring directly into the lens of the broadcast drone. They judge my species by the bloody, greedy metrics of their own history. The Ethelguard were once like you. We worshipped unlimited growth. We allowed a syndicate of the elite to fracture our society for profit, and we paid for that arrogance with the death of our world. I will not allow the disease of corporate imperialism to spread to the stars again. She raised her hand, and the psychic projection shifted, planting a vivid, overwhelming sensation of peace and profound unity into the minds of the human populace. It was a fleeting taste of the Ethelguard connection, a profound moral lesson delivered without a single weapon fired. We do not desire your world, Zelia declared. We demand strict diplomatic borders. You will remain within your solar system until you learn to govern yourselves with equity, rather than exploitation. But this peace requires an immediate exchange. Elias took over, his human pragmatism cutting through the awe. Out of the United Global Assembly has exactly 1 hour to completely dissolve TerraCorp, freeze their assets, ground their fleets, and arrest their executive board for crimes against humanity. In return, the Ethelguard will share the synthesized cellular regeneration protocols we possess. We will hand you the cure to every manufactured disease your mega-corporations have been profiting from for the last century. It was the ultimate, undeniable ultimatum. They were offering salvation wrapped in a threat that could vaporize continents. The response was instantaneous. Earth's governments, desperate to appease the armada holding the sword of Damocles over their heads, moved with unprecedented, ruthless efficiency. TerraCorp headquarters in Geneva was raided by international coalition forces within 15 minutes. Global warrants were issued, and the untouchable billionaires who had funded Elias's kidnapping were dragged out of their penthouses in handcuffs. The megacorporation was dismantled brick by bloody brick, its stranglehold on the colonies shattered by a populace that had just been handed the keys to their own chains. From the bridge of the flagship, Elias watched the real-time news feeds projecting the arrest of the TerraCorp CEO. He felt a profound sense of closure, the heavy cynicism that had defined his adult life finally dissolving into the ether. "It is done," Elias said, turning to look at his queen. They took the deal. Zelia smiled, a rare, breathtaking expression that softened the sharp angles of her alien features. They chose wisdom over pride. Perhaps your species possesses a future after all. She signaled the helm, and the colossal armada slowly began to pivot away from Earth, their massive thrusters burning with a clean, silent energy. They were leaving the cradle of humanity behind, returning to the vast, uncharted dark to reclaim a kingdom that had been waiting 1,000,000 years for its sovereign to come home. But as Elias looked out into the endless expanse of the cosmos, feeling the heartbeat of a million-strong alien hive mind echoing in harmony with his own, a singular, terrifying thought crossed his newly expanded consciousness. He had just overthrown the largest corporate empire in human history and married an immortal alien god. The galaxy was suddenly a very open, very dangerous place, and their honeymoon was going to require an unprecedented amount of kinetic shielding. Rebuilding a murdered planet requires more than just raw power and architectural engineering. It requires you to teach an entire world how to breathe again. Elias Thorne stood on the sweeping, cantilevered balcony of the newly restored Apex Senate, looking out over a horizon that had fundamentally changed. The bruised, violent purple clouds that had choked the Ethelgard homeworld for eons were entirely gone. In their place was a breathtakingly clear, violet-hued sky, illuminated by the soft, ambient glow of the surrounding nebula. The aggressive, overgrown flora that had once dragged the grand skyscrapers into the dirt had retreated, guided by the telepathic commands of the awakened millions. The plants now bloomed in designated, sprawling urban gardens, their bioluminescent flowers adding a warm, golden light to the sleek, biometallic architecture. Down in the central plaza, the Ethelgard were working. They did not use heavy machinery or crude combustion engines. Millions of loyal subjects moved in absolute synchronized harmony, utilizing their innate telekinetic abilities to literally lift the shattered pieces of their megacity from the dust. Massive shards of obsidian and plasteel floated through the air, slotting back into their original configurations like a planetary-scale puzzle solving itself in reverse. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the ground, a collective song of restoration broadcasted through the hive mind. Elias felt every single note of that song. He leaned against the smooth, crystalline railing of the balcony, taking a moment to simply exist in his newly engineered body. The constant, gnawing fatigue of his former human life was a distant memory. The intricate, luminescent veins tracing his arms and neck pulsed with a steady, powerful rhythm, mapping a cardiovascular system that could withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean or the freezing vacuum of open space. His vision had expanded beyond the narrow human spectrum. He could see the magnetic fields anchoring the floating city sectors and the ambient thermal energy radiating from the bustling crowds below. He was no longer a cynical xenobiologist hiding from his own conscience. He was the eternal king of the most powerful civilization in the known universe. And ironically, he had never felt more at peace. Soft, silent footsteps approached from behind. The ambient temperature on the balcony dropped a fraction of a degree, replaced by the crisp ozone scent of raw power. Zelia slipped her arms around his waist, resting her chin gracefully on his shoulder. She wore ceremonial armor today, a breathtaking arrangement of sleek, dark alloy laced with veins of spun silver that caught the light of the nebula. The terrifying, apocalyptic fury she had unleashed in the Genesis vault was completely absent, replaced by a profound, radiant calm. "You are thinking about the fragile blue sphere again," Zelia murmured, her voice a rich, melodic vibration against his skin. Her thoughts flowed seamlessly into his mind through their eternal tether, carrying a wave of affectionate amusement. "I am just reviewing the latest diplomatic transmissions from the United Global Assembly," Elias replied, turning slightly to capture her gaze. The multifaceted depths of her eyes held galaxies of ancient wisdom, yet they looked at him with an intensity that made his augmented heart skip a beat. "Earth is actually doing it," Elias continued, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "They completely dismantled TerraCorp. The orbital colonies are self-governing, and the resource blockades have been lifted. They are using the cellular regeneration protocols we provided to cure diseases they previously deemed too unprofitable to fix. They are finally learning how to heal themselves." Zelia turned him fully around, her hands resting flat against his chest, right over his secondary heart chamber. They are learning because you showed them the alternative. You exposed the rot of the syndicate and the greed of your own kind in the same breath. You taught them that a true kingdom does not consume its subjects. It elevates them. I merely provided the data, Elias countered smoothly, brushing a stray lock of dark, shimmering hair from her face. You were the one who threatened to vaporize their management structure from orbit. I find that your diplomatic negotiation tactics are highly persuasive. A low, musical laugh escaped Zelia's lips. I am a monarch. Elias, subtlety is a luxury reserved for those who cannot manipulate gravity. But I must admit, the complexities of ruling are significantly more enjoyable with a partner who understands the value of a well-timed tactical bluff. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the rebuilt spire of the Apex Senate pierce the clear sky above them. The romantic bond they shared was unlike anything Elias had ever conceptualized. It was devoid of the mundane insecurities of human relationships. There were no secrets, no hidden motives, and no unvoiced doubts. They shared a single unified consciousness that celebrated their differences. Her ancient, predatory majesty balanced perfectly by his grounded, adaptable humanity. They were two halves of a sovereign equation, eternally bound by the blood and energy they had sacrificed for each other in the dark. Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her close against the cool metal of her armor. He knew the peace they were currently enjoying was hard-won, but it was not guaranteed. The universe was an infinitely vast and hostile place. The deep space telemetry buoys we deployed past the outer rim picked up a shadow transmission this morning. Elias noted, his tone shifting to a quieter, more serious register. Zelia's bioluminescence flared with a sudden, sharp violet hue. She did not pull away, but he felt the immediate predatory focus of the Queen snap into place. A remnant of the syndicate? No, Elias replied, his mind projecting the complex data stream directly into her consciousness. The frequency is wrong. It is older than the syndicate. It predates the Ethelgard cataclysm. Whatever is broadcasting out there in the deep void is massive, and it is moving purposefully toward our sector. The kinetic blast you used to wake the hive mind did not just echo across this planet. It rippled through the quantum field. I think we rang a very loud bell, and something ancient just woke up to answer it. Zelia looked up at the stars, her expression hardening into a mask of regal defiance. She did not feel fear. She felt the thrilling, undeniable call of a new challenge. "Let them come," she declared, her voice echoing with the unified, resonant power of millions of awakened warriors standing ready behind her. As we slept through the death of our world, Elias, we will not sleep through the conquest of our galaxy. The Ethelgard are restored, and our reign has only just begun. Elias stood beside his queen, looking out into the terrifying, beautiful unknown. He had traded a life of corporate servitude for an eternal crown, and as he felt the unwavering strength of Zelia's mind intertwined with his own, he knew he was exactly where he was always meant to be. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey to the edge of the galaxy and back. If you enjoyed witnessing the fall of TerraCorp and the rise of the Ethelgard Queen, please like, subscribe, and share this story with your fellow sci-fi fans. Drop the word royalty in the comments below so I know you made it to the very end of the adventure. And do not forget to hit that hype button so this video can reach more viewers like you.